As the war enters its fourth year, the months-long attrition pattern along the Donetsk front has taken an unexpected turn. Ukraine is not merely holding the line. It is identifying and breaching the weak links in the defense, retaking villages and towns one by one. These moves are not merely tactical advances. They have begun to produce a force multiplier that will shape the terms of a potential peace deal. The picture emerging in recent weeks, particularly in the Pokrovsk-Dobropilya corridor, shows that the pressure has shifted sides. The list of casualties, accompanied by images confirming that Ukrainian airborne troops cleared Suketske and raised the flag, is straining the Russian side's ability to hold this line and easing the squeeze on the city's northern approaches. According to the unit's statement, the operation, completed in a short time, resulted in 44 Russian personnel being neutralized and 9 being captured. Therefore, Suketske is referred to not only as a single location, but as a significant link in the overall picture of operations around Pokrovsk. To understand the rest of the picture, one must look at the balance that has remained unchanged for months but is rapidly deteriorating. Since the first quarter of the year, the monthly net territorial gains of Russian forces have fallen sharply. The progress recorded in March fell to 1/6 of last November's peak. There is another critical indicator: the number of attacks expended per square kilometer on the front. According to open-source analysis tracking the map, this ratio jumped into double digits at the end of winter. The attrition of personnel and vehicles, particularly around Pokrovsk, progressed in tandem with Ukraine's renewal and deepening of its trenches, positions, and reserve lines in the area. The rotation implemented by General Mikhailo Drapati, who was appointed to the Khortytsia Operational and Strategic Group Command in January 2025, along with strikes on supply lines and a fortification strategy in critical sectors, was noted as one of the main factors accelerating this decline. Pokrovsk itself remains a focal point during this period of changing dynamics on the ground. In addition to small-scale, high-intensity clashes directly within and around the city, hit-and-run tactics and attempts to establish street-level positions are noticeable, rather than fixed positions. Considering the city's multi-axis supply connections, regional rail transport, and the mutually supportive artillery/UAV coverage of surrounding towns, the side holding Pokrovsk controls not just a city, but the key pivot of the entire Donetsk defense structure. Detailed reporting from the field indicates that fighting in and around the city continues at a high level, but that Ukraine's cut and enter operations in small settlements are disrupting Russian deployment plans. Why this axis in particular? Because on the administrative and economic map of Donbass, the Pokrovsk-Dobropilya line connects to the points where resupply and field transport can be organized in the most fragile but effective way. Foreign policy and security articles cite a range of reasons beyond the symbolic significance of Donbass for Russia, from the residual value of its industrial infrastructure to the possibility of establishing defensible lines consistent with administrative borders if permanent control is achieved. This is why the fall of this line could give Moscow the chance to construct a narrative of mission accomplished, both domestically and internationally. For the same reason, the survival of this line strengthens Ukraine's hand in diplomacy. To understand Ukraine's momentum on the ground, it is not enough to look only at the shifting of small brown spots on the map. The transformation that has taken place in production, supply, and technology over the last 12 to 18 months is also driving these curves upward. The production of unmanned systems has increased exponentially over the past year. Hundreds of suppliers, workshops, and medium-sized companies spread across the production line have become a network capable of completing the test, adapt, deploy cycle within months. Although official statements include ambitious timelines for increasing the share of domestic components in the defense industry, the items with the fastest knock-on effect in the field have been FPV and long-range UAVs. Technical assessments describing the leap in the production of these systems highlight the efficient deployment of off-budget resources, with solutions focusing on different frequency/connection architectures for the supply chain and electronic warfare resilience. Not only internally, but geographically distributing production is also becoming part of risk management. Joint production lines developed with neighboring allies both increase capacity and reduce the fragility created by dependence on a single country's airspace. In this context, accelerated production projects with Romania are the latest links in a model based on a network approach rather than a single factory. Such arrangements help keep pace with consumption rates in the field and open the door to intra-European standardization in the medium to long term. As pressure mounts in the operational arena, Moscow's budget and revenue wings are undergoing a simultaneous test. Energy revenues were one of the pillars of support at the start of the war. However, the sharp decline seen in the middle of the year shook the stability of this pillar. Oil and gas revenues fell by more than a third compared to the same month last year. When viewed alongside the pressure created by high defense spending, this picture points to the Kremlin's need to rewrite its spending plans. Indeed, draft budget data shows that there will be a marginal pullback in the defense item in 2026, which will be felt more sharply in practice due to the inflation effect. The expected shortcut in the field of diplomacy has not yet opened. The idea of a Budapest meeting, discussed for weeks, has been put on hold after preparatory contacts. The telephone diplomacy conducted beforehand and the discussions on how much progress the parties could make on the ceasefire freeze the line agenda did not yield any practical results. This postponement represents a gap in Moscow's strategy, which is synchronized with its plan of, if I advance on the ground, I will gain more at the table. Because every day that passes without negotiations opens a new calendar window for Ukraine to both increase its production capacity and accumulate local advantages on the ground. The human dimension is a separate source of fragility. Losses and desertion, escape allegations among Russian troops remain high on the agenda as a result of high-tempo offensive attempts on the front lines, low protection advance patterns, and supply pressure. Leaked correspondence and field reports indicate dramatic drops in the personnel lists of some units. Various sources have reported that tens of thousands of personnel have deserted or failed to return throughout the year. These data must be read with caution, as some come from unofficial channels. Nevertheless, the cumulative pattern points to a problem of sufficiently trained and motivated personnel. In this context, events over the past 2 months along the line stretching from west to north of Donetsk correspond to a gradual but cumulative shift on the ground. Following the short-range Russian push in early August, Ukraine launched successive waves to recapture surrounding villages and clear sabotage elements. This tactic forces the Russian side's exhausted units into narrow focal points rather than wide swaths, disrupting armored infantry coordination. Attempts to increase armored supported buildup, seen in urban-suburban transitions around Pokrovsk, have mostly remained limited in range, as drone swarms and improved artillery fire have been effective in dispersing these clusters. This cumulative attrition creates a cycle of constant pressure, constant repair, rather than major breakthrough operations, rendering counterplanning ineffective. Those seeking to approach the freezing the lines equation on the political side of the stage must remember that every piece of the map brought to the table has a military and economic background. The arguments repeated for years about why Donbass is critical, alignment with administrative borders, industrial residual value, narrative superiority, have today acquired a more concrete component, the sustainability of supply lines. The Pokrovsk-Dobrapilya node means force transfer and fire coverage within the region for Ukraine. Losing it would slow supply from railway speed to road slowness, multiplying the cost of defense. Conversely, Ukraine can maintain a wide defensive bubble in the region with urban-rural support mechanisms. All this transforms the question, how can Ukraine win? From a romantic slogan into a numerical equation. The first phase is already underway, the systematic attrition of Russian military power. Warehouses, bridges, rail lines, air defense nodes, refineries, and storage facilities. Each target does not only have an impact locally, it can create ammunition/coal/diesel shortages in adjacent sectors that last for days. The second phase begins when the scarce equipment stock crosses a certain threshold. When the armored reserve pool falls below a critical level, the momentum of the attack/counterattack cycle slows down under its own weight. The 2022 Kharkiv counteroffensive showed us that coordinated pressure applied in the right place and at the right time can systematically clear thousands of square kilometers in a matter of weeks. Today, such a threshold can be tested with lower losses using unmanned/sensor networks deployed across the field. The third phase is the holding and counteroffensive prevention phase. Patrol and mop-up operations, which in the classic order followed the maneuvers of heavy armored mechanized units, are now conducted with a different digital physical cluster. Satellite air-ground sensor chain, which tracks every vehicle movement, every troop buildup, and every supply depot, allowing convoys and assembly areas to be struck within minutes. UAV networks embedded in the depth of defense make it difficult for pushed-back units to regroup. The fourth and most difficult phase is the equation concerning the peninsula's future. The dispersal of naval power in the Black Sea and the narrowing of the bridgehead protection umbrella have left Crimean garrisons dependent on land corridor-based resupply. The erosion of air defense nodes increases precision strike windows in selected areas of the peninsula. Behind all this technical narrative lies the Russian economy and state capacity's search for a new equilibrium. Even a limited downward revision in defense spending translates into a real cut in an environment of actual inflation, especially in a year of fluctuating energy revenues. Liquidity warnings in the banking system, new tax headings, and a controlled capital regime are amplifying the internal cost multiplier of the pace of war. Under these conditions, even marketing a ceasefire and line freeze proposal on the diplomatic stage is becoming difficult, because the side retreating on the ground can catch its breath not by expanding its demands at the table, but by narrowing them. In contrast, the development defense articulation on the Ukrainian front is noteworthy. The doubling of UAV production and the strengthening of distributed supply networks not only increase the speed of getting ammunition to the field, but also feed the narrative of sustainable support in foreign policy. In addition, the geographical sharing of production, for example, establishing joint lines with Romania, makes it difficult to disrupt production with single-target attacks. In short, the image of a defense that runs on donations alone is giving way to a model of co-production and local networks. It is not expected that local gains on the front lines will single-handedly reverse the overall strategy within a month or two. However, if the pace is sustained, the total cost of repairs and redeployments will increase. This cost pushes the Russian command to one of three difficult choices: to cut back on the domestic market and reduce fuel and ammunition allocations in order to protect export revenues, to allocate more foreign currency to defense industry inputs and cut back on social programs, or to pull back and focus on areas that are easier to defend. Each option carries a different political cost. However, the rhythm on the ground feeds a common outcome: fewer bullets, fewer patrols, less appetite for risk-taking. The delay in the expected rapid convergence in recent weeks' groundwork for peace discussions brought another reality to the fore. Diplomacy is shaped by data from the field. The critical question for observers is this: can every new village around Pokrovsk, every cut supply route, and every disabled command node become not just a point on the map, but a line? For now, the answer is a gradual yes. Although Russian forces' narrow pocket gains in south-north urban crossings occasionally make headlines, the clearing of surrounding villages and the regaining of terrain dominance make it difficult for these protrusions to survive for long. This forces the field into a natural rebalancing. In the defense-offensive cycle, the initiative shifts one step further west. Part 2. At this point, the following objection may arise. Doesn't Russia still have a large human resource, enormous depth, and allied markets? Yes, it does. However, each of these headings is being eroded in different ways in the fourth year of the war. When we talk about manpower, we don't mean numerical presence, but trained, experienced personnel who will not flee when called back into service and who will maintain order under heavy fire. Even if salary and bonus packages are increased, it is becoming difficult to fill the personnel pool as heavy losses and budget cuts are discussed simultaneously in the domestic public sphere. Claims of desertion and attrition rates spreading in some units should be read with caution in the absence of official confirmation. However, the general trend points to a continuing shortage of quality personnel. On the economic front, the role of the oil and gas-fueled budget in the cycle of war is well known. However, the fine print of the declarations shows a slight downward adjustment in the defense budget in the 2026 draft plans, as well as the introduction of new taxes and transfers. This means a reallocation of the spending wallet away from domestic services and social items. The gap created by volatility in energy revenues over the course of a year increases costs in the ship insurance, freight, discount triangle, while the perceived decline in real purchasing power narrows the political space. Plans suspended on the diplomatic stage allow time to work in Ukraine's favor on the military front. Even if the possibility of negotiations taking shape around a freeze-the-lines axis is considered, every step forward on the ground pushes the potential freeze line a little further east. This makes the give-and-take calculation more favorable for Ukraine when it comes to the negotiating table. The proposed freeze may not be within Ukraine's acceptable limits. However, in a period where every meter gained on the ground translates into centimeters at the table, the value of this gain increases. So what does the end look like? Most likely, it won't come all at once. It will be a pace that advances with less noise in more places, fueled by continuous supply cuts and repair pressures, accompanied by air defense suppression and long-range precision strikes. UAV production and joint lines make the engineering of this tempo possible. Holding nodes like Pokrovsk-Dobropilya expands the defensive bubble. Local mopping up and recapturing surrounding villages make the trench line deeper and more flexible. To the extent that the economy and diplomacy can keep pace, the momentum on the ground becomes sustainable. The critical element of this equation remains the same: sustainability. The current landscape shows that sustainability is more visibly organized on the Ukrainian side, while on the Russian side, the cost-effect balance is increasingly deteriorating. Let's conclude with one final note. The lines in Donbass are not drawn solely with tank tracks. Production plans, resupply schedules, energy revenue tables, and diplomatic calendars form different layers of the same map. When these layers are stacked on top of each other, it becomes clearer that the small gains seen around Pokrovsk in recent weeks are actually preparations for a big threshold. The mistake made by analyses that see Ukraine as weak was to copy the picture from 2014 onto 2025. Today's picture shows a sensor fire network spread across the field, distributed production capacity, a tempo that puts pressure on command and supply lines simultaneously, and a patience that can turn any scenario on the table to its advantage. The question is no longer, will Ukraine hold out? But what price will Moscow pay to hold out at this pace? The answer comes not from oil charts and budget lines, but from the small map changes that are updated daily around Pokrovsk.